Teach. Visit teach.org. Brought to you by Teach and the Ad Council.
The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of 55 KRC, the talk station, and iHeart radio station.
And now, let FreedomRing2016.com, the radio show, paid for by Jim Condit Jr. for Congress 2016.
Hello, everybody. My guest this week is probably the greatest investigative reporter in the world, Christopher Bollyn, Bollyn. He's a real investigative reporter. He's not like these fakes like Geraldo Rivera that pretend they're doing investigative reporting and then don't tell you all the key things you need to know, or many of the key things you need to know about a subject. Christopher, I'm going to bring him up here in a minute. He's on the line already. And he was, in effect, and he can correct me if I'm overstating this or understating it, but as far as I'm concerned, he's virtually exiled from the United States of America because of his excellent reporting on the subject of 9/11, what really happened, the computer vote scam syndicate, how the computerized elections are messed up by the vendors, not by some Mexican running around and voting twice, which is what the big media will let you think that's the big problem. It's nothing compared to the vendors goofing up on purpose, goofing up the results on purpose when they need to. Christopher was tasered because of the research he was doing. He got through to Michael Chertoff's dad. Michael Chertoff is the traitor who ran Homeland Security and is still trying to, with others, to turn Homeland Security into like a KGB Gestapo in the United States. And because of the work Christopher was doing, he had unmarked car, ununiformed men in black suits with guns showing, driving around his neighborhood for a few days or a week, and then he called the police to say, who are these people showing guns in their holster? He was tasered in front of his wife and kids, and then charged with resisting arrest when he was totally just asking what's going on. And then he was put in jail, and then he was put on trial, and the judge sentenced him to a year in jail, and he felt that they might kill him in that year, and I agree with him, so he went ahead and fled the country. So he's calling in from Europe. So he's in exile because of his excellent, a virtual exile, at least from his home state, due to his excellent reporting. And let's see if I can, Christopher Bollyn is the one great, you might say, alternative news person who I haven't had on these shows yet in the last 10 years. So I'm really glad to have him on today. So let's see. Christopher, are you there?
Hello, Jim Condit. How are you doing?
How you doing, Christopher? Christopher's calling in from Europe. And again, if people want to go to his website while we're talking, it's Bollyn.com. I think you're descended from Anne Boleyn of fame as one of King Henry VIII's wives, right?
That's what my father told me. That's what the fathers have been telling the children all along. So
okay,
I'm doing research on that as well. Yeah.
Okay. Good. So before we start going here, let me orient people as to what's happening. This is Jim Condit Jr. for Congress 2016. I'm Jim Condit Jr. My website, where Christopher's is also linked, is letfreedomring2016.com. We have the documentation page that has a whole education for you. So, Christopher, we haven't talked for 10 years in person. We maybe talked 6 years or so ago on a conference call with about a bunch of 100 other people. But we didn't prepare anything about this show, so it's kind of wide open. But you did some of the groundbreaking research on 9/11, and we have a few breaks, by the way, but we got 5 minutes till the first break. So if we got people, it's Memorial Day. We're on the same big 50,000 watt AM station that Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, Glenn Beck, and Mark Levin are heard on during the week, along with Dave Ramsey and Coast to Coast. If some new people are tuning into us, either at home or while they're driving through Cincinnati right now, or anywhere in the world on 55krc.com, and you had to tell them in a few words why the official 9/11 story that we were told over ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, and Fox, if you had to try to convince them in a few minutes why that story is false and why the people that the big media claim did it is a false flag, it's not what we were told, what would you say to them?
Well, I would tell them that the September 11th atrocity and the war on terror, which was the direct result, are a dual deception. It's basically a Zionist and Israeli dual deception in which the catastrophe occurred, and they had already prepared this construct, this war construct called the War on Terror. And then, they had created the bad guy, Osama bin Laden, and the 9/11 atrocity was simply meant to kickstart the long-planned Israeli war agenda called the War on Terror. And that's where the United States and the Western allies have been struggling for the last 15 years at great expense to the American people. I mean, right now, just with Afghanistan and Homeland Security, the United States spends about $11 million an hour. So that's like $250 million a day. Day after day, year after year, just for Homeland Security and the war on and the Afghan war. Homeland Security and the Afghan war.
In past weeks, when we've touched on this just a little, but we've said that the terror attacks of 9/11 were done by, in effect, Israeli agents or Zionist agents, as you say, which means the Israelis who think they deserve to have Israel, what they call Israel now, as their home, by that God gave it to them. But that group of Jewish operatives, not all Jews, I always got to say that because people think it'd be like saying all Italians are in the mafia. No, they're not. But the mafia at the street level was run by Sicilian Italians, and I'm one for Sicilian by heritage, so I can say that. But the point is that let's not be simplistic about this. But these Israeli/Zionist/Jewish agents that are in on this crime syndicate, they did the 9/11, covered it up with their 5 TV networks, all of which are controlled by the same crowd, and that was to predicate 2 things. We've said the unending war in the Middle East to redraw all the borders and destabilize all the nations around Israel over there, and secondly, to bring a KGB type police state here at home. Would you agree with that, basically?
Right. And where you can catch these people, absolutely with their fingers in the pie is in the cover-up. Because, the 9/11 crime has not been completely solved. We don't know who put the nanothermite in the buildings. We don't know who pushed the button. But we do know exactly the names of the people who covered it up. And the cover-up of 9/11, the 9/11 crime, was essential to getting the war on terror foisted onto the American people. The two go hand in glove.
Right now,
the cover-up of 9/11 and the war on terror.
And we've said in past weeks, but let me repeat it, and we're going to go to a break here in a second, then we'll come back for another 10 minutes. We're going to go almost the whole hour. I just got to cut off at about 7 minutes till. But all 5 TV networks, ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, and Fox, are controlled by this Zionist Jewish faction, all 5 of them, and the major wire services and the major radio stations. The only reason we're on is because I'm a congressional candidate, and the last law protecting free speech in America says these stations got to accept congressional candidates' ads, so they're not in favor of the show. So, Miss Producer, let's go to the commercials, and then we'll come back after that and continue with the greatest investigative reporter in the world, Christopher Bollyn.
Hear about it, talk about it. 55 KRC, the talk station. The best exclusive home for Sean Hannity.
Does this all sound familiar to you? Is this like Groundhog Day?
Tomorrow at 3:06 on 55 KRC, the talk station.
Okay, we're back with Christopher Bollyn from Europe, the greatest investigative reporter in the world, in my opinion. And Christopher, we were talking about 9/11, and I want you mentioned thermite, and I want you to explain that because some people still, thanks to the cover-up of ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, and Fox, have not heard these things, and some have just heard about it. Their crazy uncle talked about it or something. But, the people should know there are 2,000 architects and engineers at ae911truth.org, I think it is, that they've all said the official story is impossible. The buildings, those gigantic buildings with the gigantic steel girders in the middle, could not have been brought down by some plane fuel from 2 planes. So tell people what happened, according to your investigation, that did bring those towers down, which everything in the building was fireproof except the paper. It had to be, logically. And I know people that supplied it, the curtains, the furniture. So there's no way some jet fuel got going enough to knock down both buildings. So what does your research show?
Right. Well, the official story, the official government story says that the buildings pancaked. Each tower had 110 stores. Each floor was about an acre in size. But what we saw on 9/11 was not any sort of pancaking. What we saw was that the buildings were being exploded outwards, and as the material was shot outwards, the top of the buildings fell down. And the result was, as people who cleaned up the area said, is all that remained of the Twin Towers and World Trade Center was dust and steel. And the steel was all piled up at the ground zero site, but the dust was spread all over lower Manhattan. And that was the dust that was basically the 4-inch concrete floors of those 110 floors of each building and everything on those floors. Because at the bottom of the World Trade Center towers, we did not find 110 floors pancaked on top of each other. Nor did you find the steel pans. You found nothing. In fact, everything was pulverized into dust, with the exception of the steel. And that dust, as we now know, we knew early on, contained huge amounts of little tiny droplets of molten iron. So that means that the dust clouds that rolled through lower Manhattan were what they call like pyroclastic. They contained fire. They contained molten iron droplets. And so that we know that whatever happened to those towers pulverized the floors and at the same time created massive amounts of molten iron. And when they got to the bottom of the piles, when they dug down to the bedrock of Manhattan, they found molten iron in the molten state, which indicates that something very unusual was used. And eventually, analysis of the dust of the World Trade Center found that there was this tough material called superthermite, which is thermite which has been made using nanotechnology so that it's an extremely powerful explosive. And that's what did it.
Now, thermite is THERMITE for those who might want to write it down, right?
Right. And when we talk about a nanothermite or superthermite, we're talking about the same material, basically aluminum and iron oxide powder, but the materials are produced at such small sizes that they are about the size 1/billionth of a meter in diameter. They're extremely small. So that when the reaction occurs, it's quite different from what you would get from granular thermite. So it goes from being incendiary to being explosive. So, and that's what happened.
And so I take it then that the buildings had to be wired in advance, kind of like a controlled demolition.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Wired and prepared and had detonators and the material had to be put in the building. You know, for example, the South Tower, before it fell, for about 7 minutes, molten iron poured off of the 81st floor at the east corner. It just poured off, it cascaded off the building, for 7 minutes. And that means that, tens of tons of the stuff must have been put in the building. And those buildings were built to last. Those buildings were extremely strongly built. And so the people that destroyed the building were also, redundant in the amount of material and explosives that they put in the building. So that the reactions went on and on and on for weeks and weeks later. I mean, the fires, what they call the fires, the chemical reactions beneath the World Trade Center did not go out until Christmas of 2001.
Yes, I know, because weeks and months afterwards, the rubber boots were melting of the people because of the heat that was still underneath the building, which would be totally impossible if we were just talking about jet fuel. Now, in section 16 on our documentation page at letfreedomring2016.com, you can see 9/11 Mysteries. Anybody out there can go in and watch the 90-minute documentary 9/11 Mysteries, which shows this molten steel pouring out of the 80th floor before the collapse of the buildings. We're talking to Christopher Bollyn, who's in Europe. His website is bollyn.com, bollyn.com. Everyone should check out his website. So, Christopher, going forward with this, then, we had Larry Silverstein, who is a good friend of Benjamin Netanyahu and Rupert Murdoch of Fox News, and you were the one who uncovered Rupert Murdoch was passing himself off as kind of a newfangled Catholic, the head of Fox News. But boy, when I looked at him, he said, boy, he acts almost exactly like Benjamin Netanyahu and the Zionist Jews. Well, you uncovered that his mother was Joy Green when you went to Australia, and so he also is a Jewish owner of these stations, even though he's passed himself off. He's done fundraisers for Hillary Clinton. He really acts like a Catholic, But my point is that Larry Silverstein, the friend of these guys, bought the buildings and apparently let the Mossad, that's Israel CIA or somebody, wire the buildings. And that's why you got 2,000 architects and engineers saying these results are impossible. Now, talk then about a little bit about the, if you want to talk more about the evidence, we have 5 more minutes till the next break, or if you want to talk about the cover-up. But the way the buildings, I don't know if, well, let's cover 2 things for people who are new to this or maybe only heard it from their friend or relative. They didn't know what to make of it. The buildings collapsed in like 9 and 10 seconds, like the same as if you dropped a bowling ball. They collapsed that fast. That means thousands of bolts and all these, each floor was an acre, had to all go off once. And then also talk about the building 7. Most people have never heard that 8 hours later, one of these other buildings in that complex collapsed without any plane hitting it. So could you talk about the free fall in the building 7?
Yeah, sure. Like you said, both the North Tower and the South Tower fell at basically free fall speed. Collapsing from the top 415 meters, 110 stories, fell in 11 seconds or 9 seconds with the other one. That's simply not possible because it means that the cold structure, that is the undamaged section below the crash level, offered no resistance whatsoever. And furthermore, anybody who saw the videos sees that these buildings are not simply collapsing; they're exploding. They're exploding from the top down. And so it's pretty obvious that we've been lied to. And then, as you said, Building 7, Larry Silverstein's 47-story building, which was just north of the North Tower, at 5:20 in the afternoon on 9/11, it simply fell into its footprint. It fell straight down, more of a classic demolition, not overly explosive like the Twin Towers, but it fell straight into its footprint. And, that was not even mentioned in the 9/11 Commission report. But then you see, from the very beginning, what I noticed as a journalist was that the evidence of explosives in the World Trade Center was being censored by the mainstream media, by CNN, by Fox News. And yet we had hundreds of eyewitnesses talking about seeing and hearing and feeling explosions at the Twin Towers before they fell or during the collapses. So you knew that the story was being covered up, and the evidence of explosions was one of the things they were covering up. Another thing they were covering up was the evidence of all these Israeli agents being involved, like the 5 dancing Israelis who were arrested on September 11th in New Jersey. And so those 2 things together indicated to me that we were looking at something like an Israeli false flag operation. And the most telling thing is that this atrocity that happened on September 11th, in which 3,000 people were killed, it kick-started the long-planned Israeli war on terror. The war on terror, which the United States has been fighting for 15 years, is an Israeli construct that was first articulated in 1979 at a Jerusalem conference at the Netanyahu Institute in Israel. And ever since 1979, Benjamin Netanyahu, the current Prime Minister of Israel, has been pushing this on the West, telling the West that these terrorists, these Islamic terrorists, are attacking Israel because it's a Western nation, and that they're only attacking Israel because it's Western, and really, these Islamic terrorists want to destroy the West, which is why the United States was told that the United States has to lead the West in a war against Islamic terrorism. This is all part of this nonsense of creating a giant clash of civilization. But it all hinges on 9/11 and the deception. So it's a dual deception. The deception of 9/11 is part of it. The second part is the war on terror. And the war on terror is the part that's killing us now. That's the part that's leading this nation dry. So that's what I'm focusing on my upcoming speaking tour, because we're in a political season. You're running for office, and many people are running for office in the United States, but nobody is demanding at the highest level. Presidential candidates are not demanding an end to the war on terror. And it has to end, because if it doesn't end, it's going to kill us.
Yeah,
we're spending huge amounts of money.
Yeah, and we got to go to our next break now. But it's false flag means one group does it. In this case, the the Zionist Jews connected with Israel and with our federal government, which is about the same thing anymore, and the media, of course, the big media, and then they blame it on the Muslims. Now, that isn't to say there aren't some Muslims they can hire or incentivize to be involved as the patsies, but I think almost all of these terror attacks that we've been told are been done by the Muslims are false flag operations. We got to go to break. We'll be back with Christopher Bollyn, Bollyn.com, Bollyn.com, in a few minutes, and we'll continue this discussion on 9/11, the war on terror, and the future coming up for all mankind.
55 KRC.
Hey, Culligan man!
Now, a year in rock spotlight. 1967, Sundays at 5 on 55 KRC, the talk station.
Listening to LetFreedomRing2016.com, the radio show, paid for by Jim Condit Jr. for Congress 2016.
Okay, this is Jim Condit Jr. for Congress, back with investigative reporter Christopher Bollyn, who's calling in from Europe. We're talking about 9/11 and related things this hour. I'll be on next week at 2 o'clock again, last show before the special election on June 7th in the 8th District to fill John Boehner's seat. And next week we'll be covering all the different sections on our documentation page, which will be extremely important because it's a lot of personal information as well about health and protecting your babies when they're born and that type of thing. So, Christopher Bollyn, we're talking about 9/11, and maybe we could relate that to some of the stuff that may be coming, like ISIS, in a minute. But did you have any other points you wanted to make? We have about, this time flies, everybody. I'd do a second hour of questions if I could buy a second hour. But we don't have time because there's only like 40 minutes of talk time. We got about 10 minutes, two segments of 10 minutes left. So, Christopher, did you want to follow up on anything on 9/11? Or if not, you may not want to comment on this, or you may. Could you, if you can, comment on where did this ISIS come from? Pop up suddenly. They're threatening the whole world about a year and a half ago. Nobody ever heard of them. Trump and Senator Rand Paul said that U.S. abandoned $1 billion worth of military hardware. So comment if you want on 9/11 again, and then maybe if you could say anything about ISIS if you want to.
Yeah, well, I just posted a piece today, mostly pictures with captions about how Israeli military intelligence, how they created the fiend, the enemy, the bad guy. Because as I said, they created this war on terror construct in 1979. George Bush Sr. spoke there in Jerusalem conference. And they said, like I said earlier, that the Netanyahu doctrine of the war on terror is that the West has to lead, the United States has to lead the West into this war, fighting Islamic terrorism and the states that support them. And in order to do this, they had to create the boogeyman. They had to create the bad guy, the demon. And that's when they created this militant group in the Afghanistan war with the Soviets called Hezb Islami. And that is the group led by Hekmatyar. And that group was armed and funded and trained by Israeli military intelligence in Pakistan. You remember Charlie Wilson's war, where Charlie Wilson was the congressman? Well, Charlie Wilson was basically acting as an agent of the Israeli Mossad. And he and all of these weapons that Israel had gotten off the battlefield in Lebanon in 78 and 82 from the Palestinians, they then sold to the Americans who provided them to the Mujahideen fighting the Soviet Union. And, well, that group then, in 1994, basically became Al-Qaeda. These fighters that had been trained by Israel became Al-Qaeda and Taliban. And then, Al-Qaeda was there, and in the 90s, Al-Qaeda was creating all these attacks. They were blowing up embassies in Afghanistan and attacking, in Africa, and attacking ships off the coast of Yemen, the USS Cole. All this terrorism was happening, and everybody pointed the finger at it's Osama bin Laden. It's Al-Qaeda that's doing all this. But if you read the history, you'll find that there was this Hebrew-speaking agent named Ali Mohammed who trained Osama bin Laden, who was actually the person who was, committing all these acts. And he was held responsible in a U.S. court, and he was sentenced to life imprisonment, and then he disappeared. He disappeared from the U.S. judicial system. Never seen again. So this is the Hebrew-speaking Ali Muhammad. And then, this group morphed into Al-Qaeda in Syria, in Iraq, and in Syria. That became ISIS. And so this boogeyman keeps morphing and changing and moving from place to place. And the whole idea is that this is the boogeyman that Israeli military intelligence has created, and that they move it around like a target in a carnival, and wherever it goes, you shoot. That is the American military. And so it's a tool that they use to destroy sovereign states. And thus far, we've destroyed the United States military since 9/11, has destroyed something like 7 nations in the Middle East. Syria, Afghanistan, it goes on and on. There's a long list. And that was the design. That's what, Wesley Clark, the general, said he heard at the Pentagon, a couple of weeks after 9/11. 10 days after 9/11, he went there, and he heard that there was a list of 7 nations that they were going to overthrow in 5 years.
Yes, and
that was the Israeli game plan, and that's what we've done.
Right. Now, just so people can understand this, we're not the United States has been like 1,000% behind the creation of the nation of Israel in 1948. It was created in lies and murder, and it's sustained in lies and murder. Terrible abuse of the Palestinian people, which is totally censored from the American people by the 5 TV networks. But so there are Muslims and Arabs who are really mad at the United States because of our 1,000% lopsided support of Israel. So what you're saying is the masterminds, Zionist Jews at the top and their allies like George H.W. Bush and so forth, they create the strategy. They get the real Muslims that are really mad at the West, and because of the way we've treated them in the last 40 years. And then those people appear on the scene of these false flag attacks as the Lee Harvey Oswald patsies. Is that basically right?
Yeah, it's kind of like that. Like, ISIS, for example, the group you're talking about, is basically a huge mercenary army. If you look at the statistics of where these people come from, they come from all over the world, from Indonesia and North Africa, and they're mercenaries. And they are not Syrians. They're not Iraqis. They're simply mercenaries. And they commit these terribly un-Islamic things, crucifixions and beheadings and what have you. This is all spectacle that's meant to influence the Western audience. It's meant to be like a horror show, which it is.
And they're ginning up to World War III. I mean, there's a kind of a World War III they went. The Clash of Civilizations has been used in U.S. military schools like the Army and so forth since the 70s, like you said. And what I fear, they're talking on the 5 networks about 5 weeks ago. Oh, ISIS is going to get a nuclear bomb and may blow up an American city. So this would be another false flag by the Zionist Jewish shadow government, as I sometimes call it, and their allies in the U.S. government. And that's what I'm afraid of. If the American people don't catch on to who did 9/11, we're sitting ducks for a, quote, nuclear bombing of one of our cities by ISIS that will be real, and people will die, just like at 9/11.
Yeah, it's all based on deception.
And the goal is a world government of sorts where the average person is in a police state, and we have endless wars to the fake enemies and all that, to real people die, but to move to the consolidation of control with modern technology of countries that should be free.
Yes, well, America is supposed to be a democratic nation where we make, that's the reason why, the founding fathers said that only Congress has the right to declare war.
Right.
Because now we're in this awful situation where we have this, executive branch, President Obama, waging war here and there without a care about international law or prestige or anything. I mean, we went and bombed and killed some Taliban leader in Pakistan the other day. And we do these kind of things day in and day out. American policy, foreign policy, and military policy has become very, very Israeli. We are now doing what the Israelis have been doing: targeted killing, preemptive strikes, what have you. This is all illegal.
Yeah, in other words, you're making a critical point. It is not the United States people that fully understand what's happening. It's the criminal element that has taken control of our government, primarily what I call the organized Zionist Jewish shadow government. And that is where the crime is. So we're not against the United States. We're not against Iraq. We're saying get these criminals out of the government so that we can start treating each other like human beings again and get rid of all these unnecessary wars.
Yeah, well, this goes back to your history and my history together. When we first met, I was writing about the electronic vote fraud.
Right.
And how the United States government has become a criminal gang, a crimocracy, because of the criminal control of the election process.
All right, Christopher.
We do not have.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
I was going to say, we met at our 2000 Citizens for a Fair Vote Count convention at the Greater Cincinnati Airport. That's where I first met you and your family. And you've done some blockbuster work on that, so continue.
Yeah, well, that's the thing is, the government can only be as good as the elections. And if the elections are fraudulent, as they are in the United States, then the representation is fraudulent. And that's what we have now. These people that are in the White House and in the Congress do not represent the American people.
They represent the ruling elite. They represent the ruling elite.
Exactly.
Now, it's Christopher, unfortunately, this time flies. We got one last break, then we'll have a few minutes after that. But let's take the break, Miss Producer, and then we'll come back with Christopher Bollyn, Bollyn.com, Bollyn.com, the greatest investigative reporter in the world.
We're your voice.
They're going to raise taxes.
55 KRC, the talk station.
And now a look back.
When you need it from 55 KRC, the talk station.
Okay, Christopher Bollyn, investigative reporter at Bollyn.com, Bollyn, with Jim Condit Jr. for Congress here. With all the ads and so forth, we only have about 5 minutes, Christopher. So if we had the time, though, we could talk for hours. Every little bit that Christopher talked about, we could have a half hour, 40 minutes of information on it. So go to the websites like Bollyn.com and tell us for the last few minutes here, tell us whatever you want to tell the audience regarding books you've written or articles or what do you think people should know about your site or about what you're doing or whatever for the last few minutes here.
Well, my book is called Solving 9/11, The Deception That Changed the World, and it's available on my website, and it's also through Amazon.com. And I'll be coming on a U.S. tour starting in the middle of June in Boston and then going across the country. And I'm going to be in Cincinnati area, I think, on June 30th. And that's we have to finalize the place I'm going to be speaking. But I'm going across country because the people in this political season that we're in now, people need to understand that the most pressing issue in front of us is getting out of this fraudulent war on terror. Now, the thing you have to understand is that this war on terror is a fraud. It's a massive fraud. And it's robbing us blind. There is absolutely no good to come out of this. And as you say, the intent of this is to take us further and further into a war with Islam and Islamic countries. We don't need that. We really don't need that. Thank you very much. We need to extract our country from this mess, and we need to prosecute the people who are behind it. People who have committed 9/11, September 11th, the people who committed the war on terror, and all the people that have supported this nonsense have to be purged and prosecuted. If we allow them to continue, they will take our country further and further into a nation-destroying war. We don't need that. So that's what I'm speaking about, is that we have a crisis and we got to do something about it. You can't just let Trump and Clinton talk about non-essential things and ignore the main thing is getting us out of the war. Right?
Right. Now, you're going to be here personally in the Cincinnati area and all over the country in June and July, I guess. How will people find out exactly where you're speaking? Will you post that on your website or what?
Oh, yeah. There's Bollyn.com, and there's a few Facebook pages as well. And I will, try to use social media to spread the word. But it's a matter of individual people in individual places like Cincinnati who arrange a library meeting room. And then I come in and I give my speech with my PowerPoint slides, and I make the case in like 45 minutes to an hour, and then we have questions and answers. And these are extremely important things because these empower people with information that they need to understand our political predicament.
Yeah, if you can possibly make it, see Christopher Bollyn in person, wherever you are, but in the Cincinnati area around June 30th, July 1, right in there. Go ahead, Christopher.
Right, well, that's the whole thing. And my website is Bollyn.com, as you said. And, if people read the book, Solving 9/11, they'll understand that we have been completely given a pack of lies about what happened on September 11th. But, now here we are 15 years later, the details, the minutia of what happened on September 11th is no longer really that important. 3,000 people were killed in broad daylight. What's important to understand is that we were lied to for 15 years. We've been lied to by the media and the government, and basically, and based on those lies, the government, the controlled government, and the controlled media have hijacked our nation into a criminal war, which they call the War on Terror. And we have already destroyed like a half a dozen nations. And the nation that's slowly being bled to death is our own. So I say, we need to do something about this. We have to stop it, because if we don't, it will stop us.
And yes, good. And Christopher, would you agree with this statement or not? Again, I don't care what you say, whatever you feel, but most of these terror attacks, like San Bernardino, Charlie Hebdo, Brussels, most of these, from my research and the people I follow like you, these are false flag. Same thing, controlled by the CIA and the Mossad. They offer money or citizenship to like that little mother to come to the scene, and they kill her, say she's like the Lee Harvey Oswald, and then they come with a clue every 3 hours like it's a TV movie. When they have obsessive 2 or 3 days coverage on one of these so-called terror attacks, I mean, real people die. But do you agree that those are basically created by the CIA and Israel CIA, the Mossad?
Absolutely, without a doubt.
Okay.
You see, they created this big war on terrorism, and now they just throw a log on the fire every few weeks or a few months. They throw another log on the fire.
And we'll get that. And we'll get that log on the fire every few weeks or months unless we prosecute for treason the people in our government doing this, the criminals in our government, and the criminals running the 5 big TV networks. Christopher, we're out of time.
Absolutely.
We're out of time. It's unbelievable. Bollyn.com, Bollyn.com. We look forward to seeing you a month or so from now, and I really appreciate you coming on the show, okay?
Thank you, Jim. Good luck with your election.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, everybody. So this is Jim Condit Jr. for Congress 2016. My website is where we have Christopher Bollyn linked is letfreedomring2016.com. It kind of rhymes. It's like letfreedomring2016.com. You can donate there to help me put more of these shows on the air as we go. This will be the last one for a while, but we'll have more in September and October, God willing, before the November election. The special election is June 7th. And then also, we will. Our address is on that website. So if you're not on the web, get one of your grandchildren or something to go in. But our address, if people want to write it down, is Jim Condit Jr. for Congress, P.O. Box 11339. That's P.O. Box 11339. Excuse me, that will get to me. But the campaign address is P.O. Box 11555. Either will work. P.O. Box 11555, Cincinnati, Ohio 45211. Next week we'll be here at 2 p.m. I'm going to have a dynamic lady from the out west, Nikki Nelson, will be on with me, and we'll be going over the documentation page on letfreedomring2016.com. You listened this hour to the greatest investigative reporter in the world, Christopher Bollyn. That's Bollyn, and his site is simply Bollyn, Bollyn.com. Tons and tons of information there. So we urge you to take a look at that. Okay, so now as we go off the air here, I usually like to read something allegedly inspirational. This is from James Russell Lowe, and he wrote this poem of, I think more than 100 years ago. It said, "Once to every man and nation comes the moment to decide, in the strife of truth with falsehood, for the good or evil side. Some great cause, some great decision, offering each the bloom or blight, and that choice goes down forever between the darkness and the light. By the light of burning martyrs, Christ, thy bleeding feet we track, toiling up new Calvaries, ever with the cross that turns not back. Though the cause of evil prosper, yet the truth alone is strong. Though her portion be the scaffold, and upon the throne be wrong, yet that scaffold sways the future, and behind the shadows, in the dim unknown, standeth God, keeping watch upon his own." Now, we're living in an age of lies, as my one friend who's a tremendous researcher in Texas says. We're living in an apocalyptic age, at least with a small a, if not with a capital A. So this, behind all of what we're seeing in the physical world, is a spiritual battle. And so I urge everyone to pray the prayers that you feel you should pray from the Bible, like the healing prayer. I'm a pre-Vatican II Catholic, you might say. So I urge Catholics to say the Rosary as Our Lady of Fatima urged and as the churches urged. Say the Rosary every day. That's the only thing Our Lady of Fatima asked for in the visions that ended just about 100 years ago on October 13th, 1917. So I urge Catholics to pray the Rosary every day for true peace in the world and a resolution to all these crises that we're fighting. And if you're not Catholic, then pray the best you feel you should pray to God for the truth and for light and for the good guys to win and the good gals to win. This is Jim Condit Jr. Jim Condit Jr. for Congress 2016, trying to hold up a little standard here, a little light in the world and direct you to good information. My website again is letfreedomring2016.com. That's letfreedomring2016.com. And we'll be here next week at 2 p.m. to go over all the stuff on our website and documentation. I promise you it'll be another great show of information. So thanks for listening. Jim Condit Jr. over and out till next week at 2 p.m. on WKRC, 55krc.com.